In ancient times, when man came down from the trees, they learned to use fire and began making sharp blades, invented wheels, and started paving trails, and finally learned to plant seeds and settled in one place. But they did not have a nation or a king. Homo sapiens didn't have dreams and had not yet reached the top of the Great Pyramid of Nature. The Arthdal Chronicles. Welcome to this week's episode of Warfare, Advancement, and Revisionism. My name is Preston Floyd, and as always, I'm your host. So, I'd like to welcome everyone to the penultimate episode of our Halloween special, or specials, I should say. This week we are covering the Arthdal Chronicles, which is a Korean drama, and we will have one more kind of a Halloween sci-fi fantasy show after this one, and then we'll return back to our regular history program. This little kind of break of episodes has really helped me kind of do some research and stuff, so I hope you all have enjoyed these, but I equally hope that you're ready to kind of jump back into the actual history. So, kind of trying to break this show down, I want to start by saying I do not speak Korean, so if I butcher some of these pronunciations, I do apologize. It is not my goal to do so. But yeah, so let's go ahead and get started with this episode. So, Arthdal Chronicles is a show that was initially released in June of 2019. It ran until September of that year, and it has been, I guess, greenlit for a second season, and they're doing, like, I guess, all kind of like integrations with other kind of genres. I think there's plans for like an MMO RPG in Korea, as well as some other kind of spin-off type media. It was initially written by Kim Yong-hyun and Park Sang-yeon, and I believe most of, if not all, of the episodes are directed by the same director, Kim Won-suk. And of course, this is a South Korean production, and this is not a review of the full series. This is just kind of a first episode type of dive in. There just wasn't enough time for me to kind of watch all this. I watched the first 3 episodes, but the main thing I'm going to kind of get into is the first one, and then you can decide for yourself if you'd like to dive into it. The episodes are fairly long, despite it's 18 episodes, I believe, total, but each one is 70 minutes long, so it's a decent length show. And in addition to me possibly butchering the names of the characters and some of the writers, actors, and that kind of stuff, I will say the names kind of are not the most clear, at least in these early episodes. It takes a little bit to get used to who the characters are and what their relation to each other is. So that is going to be a little bit of an issue for myself. And that is something, if you decide to watch the show, that is something you'll have to deal with. So just bear that in mind. It's not always clear who is who and what their kind of relationship is to each other. Although I'm sure, as time goes on, that kind of resolves itself. Now, this is kind of, it's set in a fictional world, or at least land, called Arthdal, and it's during a very primordial, ancient time. They make it sound like it's going to be the Bronze Age, but there are some issues with this that I'll kind of get into, though I don't think the series means to be very historically accurate. There are definitely certain types of mythological and semi-religious influences that are kind of part of this series. And that's not a bad thing per se. It's just, it is what it is. So, now, I was under the impression that this was just a completely unique kind of fantasy world, but I have in my research found out that this is kind of sort of loosely based on the kind of the Korean foundation myth of like a descendant of heaven called Dagon. There is a character called Tugon with a T, whereas the mythological figure is called Dugon with a D, as in dog. So I'm assuming that there's going to be a little bit of overlap between these kind of the stories of these two people, which is fine. I myself am not the biggest Korean mythology buff. It's kind of hard to get some good English sources, but I am kind of familiar with the general thrust of the story and, kind of the theories of how, what those stories are trying to tell the Koreans themselves about their past. But that's something, again, we're going to dive into specifically in the future when we start to talk about the Korean people and the Korean states that kind of form in that peninsula and area. But again, this is loosely based on that, so I don't know how much overlap there actually is. So just take all this with a little bit of a grain of salt. So essentially, this world is occupied by a group of humans, actually several groups of humans, and they've kind of formed a coalition or a confederation. You have the Sanyok tribe. I guess they're kind of the most powerful of, or at least the most militaristic of the human tribes. Then you have the Asa tribe, which I think kind of means White Mountain, from my understanding. There's kind of a little bit of overlap. The subtitles aren't necessarily 100% clear, but they kind of are the more religious and spiritual leaders of the groups. And then you have the Hay tribe. They're kind of, they seem very similar to the Sanyok tribe, although they don't have nearly as many characters, at least so far. Again, I'm only like 3 episodes in, but they kind of seem to be like a second-rate Sanyok, or maybe more of a, I guess maybe they're meant to be a little bit more peaceful or slightly more administrative side of the Confederation. Then there's also, I think, another group that's but they don't show up until episode 2, so I really won't go into them. And then, of course, there's kind of the enemy of this confederation. They're called Neanderthal, which, of course, it's supposed to be, I guess, kind of a version of Neanderthal. Although that is not at all what they actually are. Again, this is a fantasy world. They're using some similar naming schemes, I think, to kind of maybe try to blend it into to our world, or at least make you kind of associate certain aspects of their world with ours. The Neanderthal, they're a slightly more, I wouldn't say primitive, but they are definitely more, shall we say, traditional hunters and gatherers. They are also extremely strong and fast. There is a very interesting scene. It's really the first scene of the show. It's a group of Arthdal Confederated tribesmen trying to track down a Neanderthal. and it's won against quite a number of people, and he ends up slaughtering most of the humans and then escaping as the humans' reinforcements kind of arrive on the scene. They are shown to be extremely strong, fast, and they do have some more. And I don't know if this is like meant to be like a purpose thing, but their hands are showed as claws. Now I don't know if they're actual claws or if they've just sharpened their nails that way. I don't know what the kind of what they're going for on that end, but anyway, after this scene, you get a kind of a meeting of the minds, shall we say, between the leader of the Sanyok tribe, whose name I believe is Sanung, and the Asa Ron, which I don't know if that's his name or his title. Asa is definitely a clan, but I don't know if that's like if Ron is the name of like the leader of the Asa, but anyway, they're basically part of the negotiations with the leader of the Neanderthal, who I think his name is Rakrov. And I don't know what language they have the Neanderthal speaking, but they are speaking slightly different languages, at least from what I can tell. One is definitely Korean, but the other I'm not sure if it's just like a gibberish, if it's something they created for it, but they're not quite the same thing. And it may also be that they've like used like voice modulation or something like that for the Neanderthal as well. There's definitely something going on to make their voices seem less human. The Neanderthal also have blue or purple blood. It's kind of hard to see in certain areas. I think it's meant to be blue because there is some scenes in the light where that really comes through, and that's pretty striking, like visually. It looks great. So you have, of course, the Human Confederation. They're trying to make peace with the Neanderthal because they want to establish agriculture in the area. They want to grow crops, and they want to kind of assume control of the land. And do this, they kind of offer a set of gifts to the Neanderthal. The leader, Rakrov, he is not impressed with the gifts they give him. They give him gifts of mugwort and garlic. Garlic and, of course, being like a fairly useful plant for a number of reasons, and we'll get to that in the real world episodes when we actually develop it. And mugwort is it's like a daisy, if you're not familiar, although it doesn't have quite the bright coloring that you'd see in like a more traditional one. But they are also used as like a type of medicine, as well as for other uses as well. They'll, of course, I think it can be just eaten, but it's also useful as an insecticide and for oil, in addition to medicinal usages. Excuse me. So the negotiations fail, and then you are introduced to a character known as Tagan, as I said, who I believe is the character that Dagon is, or Tagan is based on the mythological figure Dagon. He is the son of Sanung, and he, once he finds out that the negotiations have broke down, he kind of comes up with a plan to help the humans defeat the Neanderthal. He has a pet bird that he has kind of caught and kind of, I guess, fed and kept healthy. And he's noticed that wild versions of these birds will fly to the mountain every morning, and then at the evening they'll fly out and return to the forests surrounding the mountain they live on. He comes up with the bright idea to attach flaming ribbons or wrappings to the birds' legs and then release them. And of course, as they're releasing them, the birds will eventually catch fire and fall to the forest, and they just cause a huge forest fire, and that kind of smokes the Neanderthal out. But there is another aspect to this plan that I don't know if it's specifically said that Tagan comes up with, or if this was just kind of a collaborative effort between the Asa tribe and the Sanyok tribe. The Asa send a daughter of their clan, known as Asahan. She is sent as another kind of peace emissary. She is sent to give different kinds of gifts that may be more appreciated by the Neanderthal group, because as they say, as they're turning down the peace proposals, they do not eat garlic or mugwort. They have no use for it. But she is sent to give them textiles. And these textiles have been infected with a disease of some sort. And this weakens the Neanderthal. So in addition to this fast-spreading disease, they are being pelted by, forest fire and flaming birds. And this allows the humans to kind of defeat them in kind of a sneak attack and, seize control of a large part of the forest around Arthdal. Because of this treachery and her not being aware that she was part of this sneak attack, Asahan is very upset, and she decides to leave her people. She finds a injured child, or a child that has been dropped by a very sick mother who kind of died in front of her. So she decides to rescue the child. She meets a Neanderthal man who is also caring for a child. I don't know if it's supposed to be his child or if it's just a relative of his or if it's just a random kid from his group, but he is able to kind of withstand some of the more debilitating effects of the disease, and he kind of helps Asahan in kind of indirectly because he kills one of the soldier escorts of hers, and this kind of allows her to kind of break away. He's also, I think, planning on killing her, or at least he would like to initially. He specifically calls her and the humans evil, but he kind of, after ripping her guard's heart out, he kind of finally becomes overwhelmed by the disease. Asahan kind of, encourages him to get up and help her save the two children. And then you get a cut to, I guess, the human base. All these people are praising Tagan, who at this episode is very young. He grows up quick, or at least there's a time jump. So he's played, I believe, by a different actor later from this episode, or at least if he's not played by a different actor, this guy, him growing a beard definitely makes him age very quickly. But I'm reasonably sure they're different actors. Then again, you do have people praising Tagan from the group, and he kind of becomes a very highly praised young man since he came up with this plan. And he's I think technically underage still. He's considered a teenager. He is not a man by any definition that they have. So to kind of capitalize on this victory, the Confederation decides to hunt down the remaining Neanderthal. They've kind of broken them as a cohesive unit, but even individually, the survivors can be very dangerous. So they make an effort to kind of hunt down the remaining Neanderthal. Then you get a jump to Asahan later. She has a baby, and I think you're supposed to assume that that it is the same child that she rescued. However, I think there's a time jump of a number of years. I'm not sure exactly how long it's supposed to have been, but then it does seem that she has, after escaping, she has had a family with Ragaz, who is the Neanderthal who killed her guard. He is sadly quickly dispatched after this time jump, which there's no explanation of. They don't tell you this is a time skip. You're just supposed to infer it. But it's kind of odd how they do it. There's no indication like time has passed. It's literally just the forest is on fire, and then boom, she wakes up. She's had a bad dream, and there's a child beside her. So, and then you see the humans hunting down remaining Neanderthal, but it's not like that there's evidence that this is something that has happened for a long time. It's literally they know exactly where he is almost. It's not like they've been tracking him specifically, even though from the way they cut it, you might think that's what happened. So it's an odd situation in terms of how they edited it. I think it's probably one of the weaker parts of this episode. It's probably one of the weaker parts of the show that I've noticed, among with some other things. But overall, the episode's not bad. The show itself is decent. It's fairly well acted. Sometimes with these East Asian shows, specifically with Chinese shows, I have a hard time. The acting is more, I think it's just kind of like a traditional stage acting type thing, and they've just filmed it. So I don't always like those type of kind of very exaggerated dramatic movements and dialogue. There's not a whole lot of that, at least in this show. It's more of a traditional kind of Hollywood type movie. Something similar you'd see with Japanese films. So I do like that. There is one thing that is very bad about this show, and that is the opening. It has some terrible CGI, and it is very much a ripoff of the opening for Game of Thrones, or at least it's definitely heavily inspired if it isn't a direct ripoff. But that being said, it's not that's a very small part of the show. It's just it's funny how bad it is. Almost like you can tell they have a decent budget, or at least it looks like they did. But it looks like they spent it all on costumes and probably the actors and some of the battle scenes, which is one of the things that is done very well. And I was surprised at how violent the show is. For a lot of especially Chinese dramas, there's not a lot of actual violence you'll see. There's some, again, that kind of that overacting, and you'll have a cut, and then you cut back and someone's dead, and it's just like, okay, that happened, but you kind of don't see it. It's one of the weaker aspects of Chinese dramas that I think the Koreans and Japanese do a little bit better on. But yeah, so there is that. So I plan on probably finishing this. It is a long watch, again, 70 minutes per episode, and they cover a lot. Like, it's not like it's not something that they're dragging the story out. No, there is progression. I think the first episode does it the weakest because you have these time skips that aren't fully explained. You're just being thrown from one time to another. Episode 2 is much better edited. There is a little bit kind of like of time passing, but it's not nearly as bad, and it's not so hard to kind of guess what has happened in interim periods. Whereas this is just like, oh, we were rescuing these babies, and then there's another scene was like there's another baby. Is this the same one she picked up earlier? It looks like it. They probably used the same child for both of these characters, but then then they have these child actors who are these rescue children, and then you find out, oh, this is her actual child with the guy that wanted to kill her / saved her. So, yeah. So then of course you have another time jump after Ragaz is killed by the humans. He is, them kind of disposing of his body is noticed by Asahan. She kind of has to run away with her son, and this leads them to, kind of running further away, and they get to these cliffs, the black cliffs, and she kind of tries to find a way down to the valley below with her son. This is kind of another time skip thing. Her son goes from an infant to a kind of a small child, maybe late toddler age, I guess, to early adolescent. I'm not sure how old exactly he's supposed to be. But eventually they find their way down the mountain, and they meet another group of, these are definitely more primitive humans, known as the Wahan tribe. And they're kind of very important for episodes 2 and 3. But she dies from, I don't know if it's supposed to be starvation, wounds, a mixture of things. Asahan dies, and her son kind of is adopted by the Wahan, and Yunsun is his name. And there he kind of, he's kind of a semi-outcast / they like him, but he's got some weird things about him that they don't quite understand. And I'm trying to think, there is something that I did neglect to go over. It's fairly important to him. What is it? Yeah, my notes here. Okay, so yes, as I said in the quote from the show, they make it seem like humans do not dream, that this is something only the Neanderthal do. At least that's how the Confederation kind of considers how dreams work. Although you see very quickly that is not true. There are members of the Confederation that do dream. Asahan specifically, the first scene that she's in, which is her with her son, she is having a nightmare. And, there's like a small, kind of a scratchy, dark voice, and there's a snake that you assume that is, that this voice is emanating from, kind of talking to her, and the snake is going to, at least according to the setup shot, the snake's about to bite the child, and then it just cuts, and then you go back in time, and then you have several scenes, and then you go back to, Asahan with her son, and the snake's gone. Was that real? Was that part of the dream? They don't really explain it too well. At least I didn't think so. I thought it was edited poorly, and it's one of the weaker parts of the episode I watched. But yes, you can tell very, a lot sooner that dreaming is not something that is just done by the Neanderthal. It is something that certain characters do. But that is probably something that's going to be kind of commented on, revealed further as the series goes on. So, kind of a historical review for this fantasy show. Neanderthals, they are not Neanderthals. I think they're kind of just named that to kind of make you think and kind of relate how this world is similar to our own. Actual Neanderthals, again, they were probably thicker, more muscular than humans. But they probably weren't as tall in general. And again, their technology was not on human levels. They could not see in the dark as the Neanderthal can. And of course, by the time we get to Bronze Age metallurgy, which is what kind of this is supposed to be, despite the fact they seem to be using iron weapons quite a bit, there are, it's definitely kind of done ahistorically, completely. But obviously, I don't expect this show to have a super in-depth relation to actual history. But it is kind of odd that they specifically kind of call it out as a Bronze Age world, at least in some of the press release stuff I read. It is odd that they choose to use iron for that kind of thing. So I don't know if that was just a mistake on the marketing department's part, or if it was just something that they kind of like, it's easier to do iron than bronze weapon, like coloring and all that stuff. Who knows? In terms of actors, I thought the character Asahan, very well done. Chu Jun Hyun, I believe is her name. The guy that played the leader of the Sanyok tribe, Sanung, Kim Wee-sung, he was pretty good in it as well. Everyone else, they kind of all blended together in terms of acting. There was nothing that really stood out. So if you're kind of looking for something different than a lot of other fantasy shows, specifically on Netflix, there's a lot of just very poorly done kind of fantasy sci-fi shows on Netflix that are just 12 episodes long, maybe 45 to 50 minutes. They're all very maybe teen drama oriented, which there's nothing wrong with that, but they're not very there's nothing really to make them different from any of the other shows. And some of them are good, but they're very samey, you might say. So this is something of a breath of fresh air. And again, I do like the way that it's acted. It's different from Chinese dramas, which, again, I think are more stage plays, or at least that's the kind of tradition they're following in. Kind of over the top. But that's just personal preference on my end. I'm well aware of that. So I think this is kind of a good place to call it. I was surprised this episode's 30 minutes. I did not think I'd be able to talk about this show that long. Because, again, I've only really watched the first episode. But there's enough here for me to give this, give it more time. And definitely kind of maybe follow up on this when we actually talk about the actual creation story for the Korean nation. But that is well into the future. So I'd like to thank everyone for listening. The final episode of our kind of sci-fi fantasy episodes for this year is going to be on the Elder Scrolls world, or Mundus is the name of the Earth. I'm kind of going to just go into a general background of that kind of mythos, how it differs from other fantasy settings, and that kind of thing. So I hope you will turn in for that one. And then after that, we will be back to our regularly scheduled history shows. We will be diving into the world at 8000 BC. And we'll be starting again with Africa. We are back to our home continent, where we will be spreading around again after we're completed there. I think the first episode for that is probably going to encompass a couple of areas. There's not a whole lot of differentiation to make between Southern Africa and the Southeast, Central, Southeastern Africa, just because the Khoi and the San peoples, they haven't really changed too much. There's a little bit going on with them that kind of is different from what we talked about with them the last time. Then we'll switch over to the Congo, and then Sub-Saharan and Western Africa will be the main part of that episode. And then, of course, we'll do North Africa and East Africa. Those will at least have their own episodes, though it is possible that they could be multiple parts for both of them. It's kind of going to be how I kind of break down the notes I've taken. So I'm going to guess at least 4 or 5 episodes on Africa, and then we'll be moving to Asia from there. So please look forward to it. If you have any feedback, please feel free to reach out to me at waradrevpod@gmail.com. You can also contact me via Twitter, which is, I'll include the link in the description of this episode for that site. Feel free to subscribe, rate on any of the platforms you can find me on. If there is any kind of feedback system on those platforms, feel free to leave a message there or a comment. I do have my YouTube up. I have uploaded, I think, 7 episodes of my original season, and that includes the supplemental episodes. I just scheduled a couple of more to upload over the next couple of days. I took a couple of days off, kind of putting those together. It's not a huge hassle. It's literally just editing the audio into a still picture of our logo for now. I might do dual recordings at some point for face cam stuff on YouTube. I don't think there's a need to do that, but you never know. We'll see. But again, thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoy. Please rate, subscribe, all that good stuff. Thank you, and have a good rest of your day. Goodbye.